Okay, we're going to continue our study of the first step today. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to have you follow me, and we're going to take a look at the first step as we find it in the big book, and we're going to try to get a true picture of what the first step is and how we go about taking the first step. Now remember that we find the definition of the first step on page 30. So let's all review this now and remind ourselves where we find it and what the big book tells us about the first step. Page 3030. Page 30, second full paragraph. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. So now we have the definition of the first step. It's instructive to recognize that this definition does not include anything to do with an unmanageable life. That's because unmanageability of our lives as they have come up to this point really doesn't have a lot to do with the first step. It is not the second part of the first step or anything like that. A little later we're going to see where that unmanageability actually comes in the hierarchy of the steps, because it does. That particular point is addressed, but not in the first step. The reason for this is that the unmanageability of our lives is something which we recognize at our first step. It's a fact. It's just a fact we deal with. But it is not that which will determine whether we're an alcoholic or not, because most of the people in this world have lives unmanageable by them. And the fact of an unmanageable life does not prove the fact of alcoholism. So there's no cause and effect here. One does not lead to the other, and therefore unmanageability of our lives is not the sine qua non or the bottom line of alcoholism, even though we would like to think it's that easy, and therefore the human solutionists out there will concentrate on getting us to write about and recognize the unmanageability of our lives as if that's going to convince us that we're alcoholics. The truth of the matter is that those folks have but one thing they can help us with, and that is to teach us about ourselves. We get to learn, get a lot of self-knowledge. The problem with that is that self-knowledge doesn't keep anybody sober. That is, doesn't keep an alcoholic sober. Now let's see if we can find, there's a kind of a trail that will lead through the big book, and we'll follow this trail together, and we'll see the first step as it comes up. First of all, I would like to turn back to what was just read. Look at page 58. The second full paragraph on page 58. The third line down in that paragraph. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, see, that's a conjunctive sentence, isn't it? The decision that I want what you have, but further that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get it. See, because without that, the fact you want what I have isn't going to make a particle of difference, is it? Because I cannot give it to you. I can only show you how to get it for yourself. And you are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. So you can see that the steps come after the decision that we want what we find, and we're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Now let's go over to page 95, 96, page 96. The second paragraph on page 96. Prior to the first step coming into play, we have been working with the new person. We have told them how we drank. We have told them what alcohol did to us. We have told them about the terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. We've told them about the anger and the rage and the dishonesty. We've told them about all of these things which plagued us. We've told them about our failures in life. We've told them how we tried to stop and we could not. And they were still interested, and so then we told them about the disease and how they, if they were an alcoholic, that they were afflicted with a disease which is invariably fatal, which is invariably progressive and incurable. If they were still interested, then we told them how we had recovered. At that point, if they were interested enough to go on, we gave them the book, or had them acquire the book, and we got them to read the book, the whole book. Now on page 96 we find, in the second paragraph, that they have read the book, and we're making our second visit. It may be second, third, or 10th, but the book has been read. Suppose now you're making your second visit to a man. He has read this volume and says he's prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. What does that sound like? Just what we read a few minutes ago in chapter 5. You decide you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And here we find this happening soon after the big book has been read. What else has been going on in this interim? Certainly getting to meetings, certainly talking to people who are in recovery, and certainly the beginning of prayer. Even if it is praying to God if you're there, or to whom it may concern, but pray. Because we teach our sponsees to begin to pray immediately, just as Dr. Silkworth told us at the end of his story. Though they may have come to scoff, we hope they will remain to pray, because we found that we must begin early to open the door up, even for those who are agnostic. Begin to open the door. Because all that needs to happen is to open it a little crack and God comes flooding in. He's been waiting for this. He's been there all the time. Okay, suppose now you're making your second visit to a man. He has read this volume and says he's prepared to go through with the 12 steps to the program of recovery. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story, but do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult someone else. And this is because, go back to page 95, all this stuff is basic, but remember, as a sponsor, you stay with the basics. Look at the third full paragraph on page 95, 4 lines down from the beginning of that paragraph. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. So we can see what's happening here. The new person is consulted with us. We have talked to them. We have given them our story. We've told them about the disease. We've showed them how we've recovered. We've stressed the spiritual freely. We've given them the book, and they've been reading the book. In the interim, they've been getting to meetings and talking to people in recovery, and they have commenced the process of prayer. And if they are to find God, the desire must come from within. So now we can see that all of these things are happening up to this place where this decision is made. Decision that they want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it. And we know that when that decision has been made, that they're ready for those steps. Now then, let's go back to the doctor's opinion. It'll be on page Roman 28 or Roman 26, XXVI or XXVIII, depending upon the volume you have, the edition you have. We believe, first paragraph, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol in these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Very important for us to keep this in mind, guys, because there are lots and lots of people floating in and out of AA these days who are not alcoholics because they are not afflicted with the disease of alcoholism. They do not have the allergy that Dr. Silkworth talks about. This does not mean that we sneer at them or turn them down. It does not mean that at all. If they want help and they desire to stop drinking, most assuredly we will help them. But they're in a different class from the real alcoholic, because the truth is they can stop or moderate on their own if they've got sufficient reason to do so. However, the 12 steps are for everybody. And if we have someone with us who is not truly an alcoholic but wants to work the 12 steps, what does the big book tell us? That our job is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And we say, yes, I'd be happy to take you through the steps. Anyone who is properly motivated to find God, we certainly are not going to say no to him. But let's go on in that paragraph. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. So anybody who is a real alcoholic, who has the allergy, who's totally addicted, who's lost the power of choice, can never ever take a drink of alcohol again the rest of their lives, because it will immediately set off the phenomenon of craving. They'll be off and running again. Okay, now then, Bill gave us a very graphic description of taking the first step and how it comes about. Let's look on page 8 in Bill's story. What is it that is the real first step? Not the imaginary first step that we see bandied about here so much, but the real first step. The first full paragraph on page 8, down about 10 lines or 8 lines. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. That's so important. Read the big book, guys, and understand those 5 words are so important, because fear sobered me for a bit gives the lie to the idea that floats around these rooms that people, true alcoholics, are going to stay sober on the fear of the consequences of the next drunk. It's not true. What Bill says here is the truth. Fear may be sufficient to get people in here and get them started. but it is not the answer to alcoholism. Fear is our enemy. Fear is the enemy of your sponsees. We do not pander to fear. Quite contrary, we teach people how to recognize their fears and be freed from them with God's help. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. Can you see this first step happening here? Can you see this bottom? In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness and peace and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Now let's go to the bottom of page 9. He's been talking to his friend Ebby, and Ebby is sober, and Ebby is telling him how he got sober, telling him how he recovered, telling him the kind of program that he's working with the Oxfordians, which was giving him recovery. Down to the bottom of the page. He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. So now we know that Bill, at this stage, had reached that place of total desperation. He recognized his powerlessness. He knew it for an absolute certainty. He knew that he could not drink again. He knew that he was going to have to do something, but he didn't know what it was going to be, because Bill was agnostic. He believed that there was some kind of a power out there, but certainly not a power personal to him or to any human being. So what happened is this. Let's go to the bottom of page 13. Ebby had been explaining to Bill all the things that were happening and the things he needed to do. Down to the bottom, 5 lines up in the bottom, page 13. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Please take that to heart. All my problems. What part of all don't we understand? When we pick up the big book, we need to know that in these pages is the answer literally and truthfully and completely to all our problems. Listen to this now. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential ingredients. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. And so Bill had done his second step. And we find, when you read Bill's story, you're seeing the progression of the disease, and then you're seeing very graphically the progression of recovery from the disease. And if you look further on page 13, you will find that in 3 paragraphs on page 13, we find all of the steps, except the first and second step, which Bill had already worked, and the 10th step, which hadn't been inspired yet, and the 12th step, which was yet to come. So now then, question? No. What has happened then is that God has entered in, and we have, as it tells us on page 30, learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. That this is the first step in recovery. Now let's go beyond that, because there is a proviso here, and it's well set out in the second sentence in that little paragraph. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. Now it's quite literally so that there are thousands and thousands of people wandering around through AA who don't have any real serious doubt that they're alcoholics. They know they are. They have seen the ravages of alcoholism. They've seen how it has torn up not only their own lives, but the lives of those around them. They've suffered the tortures of the damned. And so they're willing to accept that what they have is a disease called alcoholism, and that they have no power over that disease, that they have lost the power of choice as to whether they drink or not. They're willing to accept that. But this does not mean that they're willing to accept perhaps the more difficult thing to accept, which is that they can never safely drink alcohol again. Now let's examine this, because this is a very powerful phenomenon you're going to run into over and over again with people who are new. Literally, they are afraid of sobriety. They're afraid to be sober. Because what does sobriety mean? First of all, and most importantly, it means that they're cut off entirely from the bottle and all that the bottle has come to mean to them. In one sense, the bottle for most of the people coming in the door has been their only place of solace in this world, even though it had become not just ineffective, but a total and complete menace, their enemy. And yet their minds would constantly tell them before that first drink that here is the way for me to set aside the cares and the fears that I'm carrying and the terrors that are besetting me, and I can get back into oblivion. At least I can get oblivion. So a big part of the fear is that of losing this ability to go back to oblivion. Another great part of the fear is that being sober means accepting responsibility. Another great part of sobriety means accepting commitments. Another great part of sobriety means that we have to get totally out of self and into service. And they've already heard that. It's been repeated to them, and if they read the book, they know. But the hallmark of the incoming new alcoholic is full-fledged, self-centered self-pity. And every bloody excuse in the world for why they have done what they've done. Now you and I today, as sober members of the fellowship and as sponsors or potential sponsors, have to understand that over and over again you are going to be presented with newcomers who come in here after having been totally convinced by human solutionists out there in the treatment centers or the detox centers or on a psychiatrist's couch, that they're not responsible, that they have every bloody excuse in the world. They come from a dysfunctional family. They have been abused. They don't have enough brains. They got too many brains. They're the wrong color. They're the wrong religion. They've had every bad break in the world. No wonder they drink. It can all be traced back to childhood, or it can be traced back to not being in touch with their feelings, for example. If you can just get in touch with your feelings, or not loving themselves enough. You see, that's a false trail, isn't it? Because it's impossible to love yourself. Unless you happen to be Sybil and have more than one personality. Yes, Brian.
A friend of mine in the halfway house said something that was really funny and really true. He said he spent $40,000 on a rehab to find out AA was free.
Well, it is true, and this is not in any way to put the knock on anyone. We're talking here as friends among friends, and as people who are undertaking something of enormous importance, not only in the lives of others, but most certainly in our own lives. That when we are faced with the problem of dealing with someone who has been totally convinced that they're not responsible, that they don't have to take responsibility for themselves, that they have been put upon, that they have been beaten and bruised, and they're in here sick, sore, and wounded because the world has not treated them right, or the families, or the employers. It doesn't matter. All these outside excuses do nothing except keep them from recovery, because it means that they never ever find it necessary to be honest with themselves. Now, a cursory glance at the AA 12 Steps on the Wall will tell you why people are scared of being sober. They see what's going to happen here. They're going to have to give up all this stuff. No longer are they going to have the comfort zone of belief that it's not their fault. After all, and they get up here, sometimes they get up here, and I've been sober 15 years and I'm still sick. And I say to myself, oh, you poor person, you're walking around, you're sure you're sick, you're walking around with untreated alcoholism. You've been hanging on by your fingernails all these years. I feel sorry for you. What about recovery? We do get to recover. We get to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And the big book tells us that when the spiritual malady is overcome, we will straighten out mentally and physically. It also tells us something of even greater importance, that if we stay close to God and perform His work well, He will give us everything we need. He will do those things for us which we cannot do for ourselves. This doesn't mean a house on the bay and a 50-foot Matthews and a bank full of money or an offshore account. It means we will get everything we need. And that's the truth. And when we get what we need, we're going to find it's just what we wanted all along. We just didn't know it. And so now let's think about this for a minute, because it can make our job pretty tough if we're dealing with somebody who really wants us to validate their excuses. And if they've come out of these human solution mills out there, everybody's been doing that. But we're going to do just the opposite, and it's going to be scary for them, because they're all of a sudden they hear how we recovered. We tell them how we recovered. We tell them about the fact that we faced ourselves, we faced our defects of character, we faced the wrongs that we've done, we faced the people we have wronged, and we've made amends to them. And that we now live a spiritual way of life where we look every day to see what it is that's going on with us that might block us from God. If we hurt somebody, we make amends quickly. We're constantly turning our thoughts to somebody we can help. We are out of self-pity, living a spiritual way of life, taking commitments and making sure we live up to them. Taking responsibility for what happens in our own lives. Taking responsibility to do nothing to harm another person and to always do the next right thing. And not only that, but to give up the excuse that somehow or another our definition of ourselves includes that we're great procrastinators and we're lazy, ha ha ha, which means that the only way that I ever get anything done is when I'm pushed into a corner and I have to do it. And then the great lie is I always do much better under pressure. That sound familiar to anybody in here? Instead, what do we learn? What do we teach? We teach the 11th step that says make a list every day of the things that you need to do that day and then set about doing them. And ask God to help you with that. Ask God to direct your thinking so it'll be freed from dishonesty and from selfishness. So you can get out there and be effective in doing what's in front of you to be done. Now, the new person who hears all this is saying, man, this is a total change in my life. And alcoholics hate change, and they're scared of it. So we're going to have to, we've got to do a real job here. Now, let's see. Is our job to sit them down and take a mallet and beat this into our heads? No. Is it our job to insist that they believe something they don't believe? No. Look at the third step prayer, and it will teach you the greatest single teaching tool you have as a sponsor. God, take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness. In other words, may be an example to those I would help, my sponsees, of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. I'm coming to you as a walking, living example of God working in the life of another human being. I am not telling you how godly I am. I'm not telling you about my love or my power or my way of life. I'm showing you God's power, God's love, and God's way of life working in and through me. And I'm saying to you, if you want this, you can have it. Now let's go back to what was read in chapter 5. If you have decided that you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. Before we take our break, I want to show you where this business of unmanageability truly comes in. Turn your books to page 62, please. We do have to face this, obviously, and there needs to be a solution to it. We're going to find it when we get to the third step, not in the first step. First full paragraph, which commences selfishness, self-centeredness, page 62. That, we think, is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Already we see our unmanageable life, don't we? Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation. But we invariably find that sometime in the past, and here's the reason for unmanageability, we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. Everybody would want to believe that our lives are unmanageable because we drank. No. Basic to this program, alcohol is a symptom. A bottle is a symbol. Alcohol is a symptom. It is what happened to us as we crumble psychically and spiritually, and as we try to embrace life in a state of spiritual bankruptcy. See the difference? If I can say that every crappy thing I did out there is because I drank, my God, I can excuse everything, can't I? That's what we want to be able to do. We don't want to have to take responsibility. We don't want to have to say the things that happened out there, the people I hurt, the things that happened in my life were my responsibility. The big book says, hey, looky here. Go to the next paragraph. So our troubles, and by the way, that word means so our unmanageable life. Our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must or it kills us. Why is that? You'd say, well, wait a second, if this is really talking about my unmanageable life, then that means that my unmanageable life is going to kill me. No. What is it that's going to kill us? Go back to basics. Alcohol, the ingestion of alcohol, which we can't stop drinking on our own because we're powerless to stop. We are faced with a deadly, incurable, progressive illness, which can only be placed into remission, cannot be cured. That's why when we are blocked from God, and God is our only hope of recovery, we have to get Him between us and the booze. Selfishness and self-centeredness blocks us from God. Therefore, we are unable, as we remain in a selfish, self-centered, self-pitying state, we are unable to accept the power of God into our lives. We block Him out. Selfishness blocks us from God, blocks us from the sunlight of the Spirit. Therefore, if we are not freed from our selfishness, we do not find God, and therefore we continue to drink, and therefore it kills us, we will die. That's what this means. God makes that possible. There often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid, which means precisely this: we are as powerless over self as we are over alcohol. When you think powerlessness over self, powerlessness over alcohol, powerlessness over anything else that you do to bend your mind, powerlessness over fear, powerlessness over resentments, powerlessness over dishonesty, all these things. We have no power. These are the effects of fear operating on our natural instincts. And instinct operates below the level of conscious thought. We don't have any conscious control over those things. Just a minute, Brian. We have no conscious control over our instincts. And when fear has warped and perverted them, it means that they're out of control. And everything that God planned for us and everything He gave us and all these instincts which were meant for our good and for the survival of the race are warped and perverted by fear, and now they work against us. They tear us to pieces. We call these things defects of character. So we're as powerless over alcohol and self as we are over alcohol. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. Now you want to see where this whole business culminates in terms of our unmanageable lives. What is it that has to happen? Next paragraph. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Our unmanageable lives, therefore, are purely and simply the result of our trying to play God. And as soon as we understand that, then we understand the true place of this unmanageability in the hierarchy of the steps. We had to quit playing God. It didn't work. What's the solution? Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He would be our principal. We'd be the agent. He'd be the father. We'd be the child. Therefore, leads us to the third step prayer. Because that decision right there is the decision of the third step. You see, what we need to do, guys, if we're going to be effective teachers and feel confident in our ability to teach, we need to read this book, and we need to see exactly what's in here and how it all fits together. Not just simply take all this miasma of stuff that floats around the rooms and consider it to be true just because it's repeated constantly, or because it shows up in some monograph prepared by somebody with a master's degree down in one of the treatment centers, or even by this wonderful group called what do you call those, the people with the big publishing house, Hazelton. Hazelton puts out a lot of stuff which is just dead wrong, and yet we pick it up and say, oh, it's Hazelton, it must be right. Well, if it isn't in here, it's not right. Not for us. Might be just fine for people who are not under a sentence of death. And this is what we have to remember about the people we're trying to work with. We are working with. They're under a sentence of death, just like we are. It's a very, very, very serious situation being a sponsor. And it's God-given, and it's God-inspired, and never take it as anything else. This is our mission, this is our purpose, this is our work. This is why God got us here in the first place, to carry His word to others. So we learn to do it honestly and effectively. You know, this workshop is a wonderful thing. More beautiful women in this workshop than any other meeting in town for the whole week.
And handsome men, too.
Well, don't let, yeah, that'll go to Tom's head and also Brian. And Pat over there can't say a word, his wife's with him. How you doing there, counselor? Everything's good? All right. Linda, you about to sit down? That's good. Linda's one of our most faithful friends around here. We're glad to see her in all of our meetings. All right, let's talk now about sponsorship a little bit in light of what we've just learned. Though it is extremely important to have a good grasp of the program and how the steps work and be able to teach others how to follow directions. Necessarily, the most important part of a sponsor's job is not what we teach, but how we act. It is absolutely essential that whatever it is we're teaching others, that they see us living that in our own lives. Not just because that makes us the most effective sponsors, but also because that's the way we ought to be. Now, Dr. Bob, in one of his writings, said that he said, No, it wasn't Dr. Bob. I know where it is. Let's find it. It's all right. Senior moment. Don't laugh. Let's go back to freedom from bondage. Ah, yes. Page 552. The next to last paragraph, last three lines, next to the last paragraph, page 552. The only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. If that is a great description. What?
Say that again.
Page 552.
553.
Oh, yeah, pardon me, that's right. Because in the third edition it'll be on 553. In the fourth edition it's on page 552.
Okay.
Got it now?
Did they do that just to confuse you, Jim?
No, they did it because up in the front, because they changed a lot of the stories around. So the numbering in the back of the book was all changed as a result of the new stories they added. Everybody find that now? It's either 552 or 553.
Okay.
The only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. And let's take a look at what Dr. Bob said, even though I was about to misquote him, but now we'll look at what he really said. Page 180, please, 180, and it will be the same in both editions. Page 180, bottom of the page. 180. people ought to get some of those little rubber things you put on your thumbs or something.
Okay.
Slips through the pages quicker. I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. 1, a sense of duty. 2, it is a pleasure. 3, because in so doing I'm paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. And 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. Now let's look at page 100. On page 100 is the only sentence in the big book which goes directly to the question of sponsorship. Remember that the word sponsor or sponsorship is not used in the big book. They did not have sponsors when this book was written. The word had not been coined yet. It did not occur in AA literature until 1947. In that year, in an article written for the Grapevine, Bill mentioned that some of the groups were appointing sponsors to help newcomers through their first few weeks or first few months. That's the first time in the literature we find that word sponsor. But on page 100, the first sentence in the first paragraph, first full paragraph, boy, we have to take this to heart. Both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. You see what we're really looking at here with sponsorship? 2 human beings progressing spiritually together. So now that brings it back to this requirement that we, as sponsors, in the vernacular around here, walk like we talk, that we demonstrate in our affairs those things which we are teaching our sponsees to do. It is not enough to say, don't do as I do, do as I say. That may work very well in the military, but it does not work at all in AA. And so we're part of what we're doing here is conditioning ourselves to the idea that we're going to follow the 12th step implicitly and explicitly. When the 12th step says that we practice these principles in all our affairs, it means precisely what it says. And we're not going to allow ourselves to take a great deal of comfort from the idea that we are not saints, that we are not perfect, and so on and so on. Now that leads us to another one of the myths that are floating around here all the time, given great credence by having been repeated so often, and having been promulgated by our sainted Bill Wilson in the 12 and 12 at a time when he was almost out of his mind with depression and suicide and LSD. When it was still legal. Also, he was trying to become sainted by joining the Catholic Church, but they wouldn't have him. And he wrote a number of things which were dead wrong. One of the most glaring things he wrote that's dead wrong is that the only step we can work perfectly is the first step. How many have ever heard that around the room? Put your hands up. I hope you disregard it totally the next time you hear it. Let's just think about it logically for a second. The second step. What is the second step? A belief, isn't it? Now you tell me how it is that you can come to believe only partially. Isn't it true you either believe that God can restore you to sanity or you don't? Is that true or not? How can it be anything other than a belief or a non-belief? If we believe, we've worked the second step. How about the third step? The third step is a decision. We just read it a few minutes ago. Therefore, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. We decided, in effect, to quit playing God because it didn't work. Now, how do you only partly decide? Is it that we're trying to insinuate there that we don't work the third step perfectly because we don't decide to let God be the Father in all things, only in some things? But if we do that, have we worked the third step? No. Look at the third step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee, to do with me and to build with me as Thou wilt. Is that offer conditional in any sense? No, as a matter of fact, we get down a little bit further in the text under the third step prayer. It tells us precisely the opposite, that this prayer is offered without condition, without reservations of any kind, doesn't it? Now you tell me how it's possible to follow the big book and follow the directions and not work the third step, in quotes, perfectly. Take a look at, for example, the sixth step. The sixth step, if you read the 12 and 12, is one of those if, as, when, come, and maybe things that is so comparative, and it's nothing but psychobabble if you look at what you read in the 12 and 12. But read the big book. We came we were entirely ready, the word entirely is in there, to have God remove all these defects of character. Now, if we are not entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, we haven't worked the sixth step. How can it be otherwise? Look at the seventh step. We ask God to take away all of our defects that stand in the way of our usefulness to Him and our fellows. How can it be anything other than perfect? Because if we are not willing that happen, what do? The step tells us we pray for the willingness till it comes. The eighth step, ready to make amends to them all. How can we be anything less than perfect there? And if we're not willing to make amends to them all, what do? We pray for the willingness until it comes. Get to the 10th step. The 10th step probably has some wiggle room in it. Probably we need to be careful about that, because it tells us that we're to watch for our resentments and dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. Maybe we miss that once in a while. Maybe we're a little bit blinded here and there, but if we're trying desperately to be fully self-aware, we should pick up most of the stuff. But there's nothing imperfect that can be about turning these over to God, asking God to remove these things when they come up. There's nothing imperfect can be about discussing them with another or making amends quickly if we've harmed someone. There's a lot of room for discussion in the 11th step, granted. People pray differently, people meditate differently. The inventory is clear as to what we're to do. But this step does not require us to use a specific prayer or type of prayer. It does not require of us that we meditate in a certain way. It does not require of us that we exactly what we're to write down and how we have to go about putting our inventory. We're asked the questions. We have to answer them. That's true. But we can work it perfectly by answering those questions, those 10 questions every night. In the morning, asking God to be with us during the day. In the morning, praying and meditating. And through the day, praying. We can do that. It's just the action we're talking about here, not the technique. So I suppose you could say that there is some reason to doubt the perfection of the 11th step. But to say that the only step we can work perfectly is the first step is pure balderdash. And the moment we accept that as being true, It means we have free license to take out the rest of the steps and butcher them. And that's what people are doing these days. Because they're applying human solutions and psychobabble and all of this stuff that comes from other 12-step fellowships, and they're bringing them into AA and taking the big book and just in effect saying, no, no, no. We don't have to follow this. After all, this was written by a bunch of old white guys sitting back there. Most of them were waspy guys. What do they know about modern day stuff? And now we've had 67 years of progress, and so we're going to take all that progress and we're going to put it all together in a whole new stew, and we're going to come out of it with all this new stuff. You only have to work one step a year. Only work one step a month. It doesn't matter how you work steps as long as you work them on and on and on and on and on. And we take the directions in here and we scrap heap them. We have to remember something. You're going to be a sponsor. Think about this. Millions of people have recovered using and following the directions in this book. Are you willing to take a chance with your life and the life of somebody else by trying to come up with some cockamamie thing that somebody's invented, saying this is the modern way to do it, when you know that this works and not one word's ever been changed, because it does work. Not only does it work for alcoholics, it works for addicts, it works for fatties, it works for people with emotional problems, and with people with sex problems, and people who bite their nails, and people who pick lint out of their navel. I mean, it works. Whatever the problem is, it works. And if it didn't, promise you, we wouldn't be here. If these 12 steps did not work, we wouldn't be here. That's why we are here, because they do work. Yes, Brian?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say before. It's almost like a vision.
I thought you might have forgotten, but go ahead.
It's like a vision. I mean, do you think that all these programs have the same main basis? Instead of saying, Overeaters Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, like you said, all those Sex Anonymous, that everybody can come to one room and the first step saying, we admit that we are powerless over self and that our lives have become unmanageable, because basically that's what it is. And alcohol and overeating, food, that's all just simple.
You've been reading my mail. The 12 steps are for everybody. Why? Why? I'll tell you, it's very simple. The 12 steps are spiritual principles that have been around forever. Now listen to this, because this is important to understand. The 12 steps are spiritual principles which mankind has always known about. The problem is that they had never before been restated as steps of action. You can go to the Bible, go to the book of James, you'll find them all in there. But people have been told how you are supposed to be, how you are supposed to live your life, how you are supposed to feel, how you're supposed to act, but never once told how to get there. See, that's the difference. We are expected to be certain ways when we go to church. We come in here, we're shown how to be that way. In other words, these principles have been reduced and restated as steps of action, which means very simply this. If you and I and the people we sponsor will take these steps and incorporate them in their lives, live them as a way of life, they take all these great spiritual principles and incorporate them within themselves. It becomes the way they live their lives. And that's what you and I as sponsors must do. We take the 12 steps seriously. Practice these principles in all my affairs. And when I do that, I become a living, breathing example of the power of God working in the life of another human being, which means that we are demonstrating to the people we're sponsoring everything that we're trying to teach them about how to live their lives. And this is a wonderful thing. It makes working as a sponsor so much easier. And when you have somebody who is afraid of sobriety, sometimes you have to work them in kind of slowly. But the most important thing is that they see that you're living a sober life and a spiritual way of life, and you're happy, joyous, and free. And why should that be? Well, here's something which we seldom hear discussed. But in chapter 9, the chapter of the family afterward, the big book says that we're sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. That means that it is God's will for us that we be happy, joyous, and free. That means that our heritage, each of us, as we sit here, is happiness, joyousness, and freedom. Remember, the big book says we absolutely insist upon enjoying life. That that sobriety is not a vale of tears or a swamp of depression. Quite the opposite. We have the heritage. Now, of those three, happiness, joyousness, and freedom, freedom is the greatest gift of all because it means freedom from the bondage of self. We get to have the joy of living. We get to be happy in our lives because we feel successful. Now, that's a kind of a tricky concept, but let's think about it for a second. If you want to be successful and you want to teach your sponsees how to taste success, you teach them the very, very simple way of living their lives. That is, each day, you're going to have your prayer and meditation to start the day. You're going to sit down and you're going to figure out what's on your plate to be done today, what's on the agenda. Then you're going to go out and you're going to do what's in front of you to be done today. Whatever's there, we're going to do it. You're not going to hurt another person. You're going to do the next right thing as it presents itself. And it's not so difficult as it may sound. Because the big book tells us that if we do as we believe God would have us and leave the results up to Him, we're going to be just fine. And of course that's the last thing. We always leave the results up to God. So we do what's in front of us to be done. We do the next right thing. We don't harm another person, and we leave the results up to God. Now here's what happens. If we live our lives that way during the day, then tonight, when we review our day, we look back. And guess what? Even though the results were not what we had hoped, even though we did not get everything that we had anticipated getting, nevertheless, we will feel successful. Because success will not be measured in results, but in effort. Did I do the right thing today? And when I look back on my day, regardless of the result, I will feel successful. I have successfully completed my day. And if you feel successful, I promise you, you will have happiness. I've never yet met a person who felt successful who was unhappy. And I've never yet met a person who felt like a failure, who was anything but sad. When you look at your unhappiness and your sadness, look back to see what you consider to have been your failures rather than your successes. And so we teach a very, very simple way of living our lives. Do what's in front of you to be done. Do what's on your plate. Don't shirk, don't put off, don't procrastinate. Just do it. Do the next right thing as it presents itself. Don't hurt another person. And leave the results up to God. That's all we have to do. Now, when we do that, look what's happening. We're living in today. Everybody talks about that, but really can't tell you how you do it. We're living in today. We're not regretfully looking at the past nor wishfully daydreaming about the future. When we meditated this morning, we got with God because He's always in the now. So we stay in the now, we stay in today, we leave the results up to Him. And as Dr. Paul said in his story in the back of the book, I never sit while waiting for God to show me what to do. Rather, I do what's in front of me to be done, and I leave the results up to Him. However that turns out, that's God's will for me. Makes sense, doesn't it? And it makes it so bloody simple. You know, we go around here, and if you listen to stuff in these rooms, you're going to get the most skewed idea of how complicated life really is supposed to be, living it as a recovering alcoholic. It's not. It is not. It's simple. The moment we get the idea and we go back to basics, just as we read in Bill's story, what did he say? Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. He said, I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Now, as a sponsor, it's really, really important to understand that that does not mean except in those things that your sponsor deems to be important, except in those things where some mythology will interfere. For example, I'm going to tell you on the one hand to turn in all things to the Father of light. I'm going to tell you that regardless of what's going on in your life, you must allow God to be in charge. I'm going to tell you that the results must be left to Him. But on the other hand, I'm going to tell you don't have a relationship for a year. Now, how can we reconcile those two things? I'm going to tell you don't make an important decision for a year. How can we reconcile that? If I'm going to say to you, sponsee, you follow God in all things. You turn to Him. For example, we tell people don't have a relationship for a year, which is total nonsense. A year has nothing whatsoever to do with anything. Nothing. Nothing. But then we see just how inconsistent we have been. The moment we turn to page 69, it tells us in a situation like this, what do? In our morning meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific thing. And the right answer will come if we want it. Now that's being consistent. What business do we have meddling in somebody else's love life anyway? I can't figure that one out unless somehow or another we're getting a kick out of it. If I'm going to tell you, you're my sponsee and you must be celibate and monastic until I tell you otherwise, what have I done except that I have established my power over you? Not only have I established my power over you, but by making you obey me in this, under the threat of being fired, I've created a dependency, haven't I? And not only that, but I can go around now, and I'm keeping a little list down here that I don't make public very often, which I'll give little marks here, which show that every time I'm able to make somebody do what I want them to do, boy, there's another mark, there's another mark. And then I have another list over here. Those who are dependent upon Jim, ha-ha! Man, does that make me feel good. Because I haven't got a life of my own. See, so many people stay sober on the ego of sponsorship. And the only way that they can feed their ego is by making their sponsees dependent upon them and ordering them around and making sure that they have controlled their lives. How in the world can we say on the one hand that dependency upon other than dependency upon God is a sure way to disaster, and at the same time make it our business to make our sponsee dependent upon us? Yes, Bob?
Could I say that any form of control is a civil form of abuse?
Well, yeah, control. I mean, how in the world can you justify, or how in the world can you talk about controlling somebody at the same time tell them that they can't allow anybody to control them? Isn't that what we tell them? What does it say here? What does it say here? Ah, yes, page 98. The first full paragraph, almost dead in the middle of the page. 9:8. Some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn this truth. Job or no job, wife or no wife, we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people, and that should say including sponsors, ahead of dependence on God. Burn the idea in the conscience of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition is he trusts in God and clean house. I don't know how much more clear can it be? And yet people fall into the trap as sponsors of, I guess there's a great big need that's being fulfilled, a hole that has to be filled in their own psyche, to have others dependent upon them and following their directions and following around. You call me every day or I'll fire you, and that kind of stuff. You know. I'll tell you when you're ready to work the steps. You're not ready. You've got 5 years before you get all the cobwebs out. Of course, we do know that the longest term of sobriety in the fellowship when the big book was written was 3 years, and many people who helped write the book didn't have 6 months sobriety yet, and by the time they were 6 months sober, they were already 12-step veterans. Well, we're going to disregard all that, because I can keep you around dangling on my strings for 5 years before your brain clears up enough that you'll be even able to understand what the big book says. In the meantime, just don't drink and go to meetings. And if you feel like drinking, you call me. If you don't feel like drinking, call me. We got to have breakfast every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. And you sit there and, by the way, remember that you're only as sick as your secrets. I want to know every single thing that happens in your life. The moment you don't tell me, remember, you either open your mouth or you open a bottle. I mean, this stuff goes on and on and on and on, when the only answer that you and I can legitimately bring to anybody is in this book, and it's called 12 Steps. That's what we're doing here. Anyway, if you guys probably figured out, I'm a little bit passionate about all this stuff. And I hope that whatever we've done today was clear. If it's not, bring your questions next week, because this is our deal here, the bunch of us, so there's nothing formal about this. If you got questions or any comments you want to make, bring them with you next week. We'll be glad to handle them. Tom, you had something?
I'll bring it in tonight.
Okay, that's it, guys. By the way, we do have the Stairway group meets 3 times on Saturday, right, in this club. We have a meeting at 7:30 in the big room, which is a big book meeting, and we're studying the big book together. And then at 9:15 we meet over there in the clean room. But we are not spiritually elite. There's some comfortable chairs over there. And at that meeting we do the language of the heart, and we're studying language of the heart and having a heck of a good time with it. So you're cordially invited, 7:30 and 9:15. Anything else? Let's close. Yes, Ellie.
Who might pay for this?
What do you got, kid?
I have 12 steps and 4th step.
You cut.
You owe me money.
Well then, Tom, you pay for it. We're not going to worry about if you're here tonight. Pay Marilyn. She's the treasurer. If not, she'll be here next Saturday.
But who's the guy that hands those out? The Spanish guy. What's his name?
Dominic.
Dominic, yeah.
Yeah. He gets kind of huffy when there's not money in his box. I know. All right, let's go. Wow, what a great turnout. I thought we were going to be small but nice.
There's like 10 people there.
Come on in, Darlene. There you go. Terrific. Boy, I'm sure happy to see all of you here. Let's let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. Let's have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering. And then we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. And I should remind you that in the Stairway group, we don't say anything after we say Amen. Thank you. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you all for being here. See you next week. God willing, and the trick don't run. Where's your sponsor?
She's already there. Sandy. Yes.
Funny that he was saying that.
This is Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Oh,
Not the first time I've heard you.
yeah.
Thank you so much
I'm sure glad
for your guidance. Oh, sure good to be here.
we have fun.
Yeah.
So thinking.
We'll be back.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, that's
You know what? My sponsor was such a wonderful sponsor, and she's just all about the business. And that's why I told her. Thank you, Jim.
He's also handouts.
And then I met you when I stepped up. And I said, oh yeah.
And there's a guy that
So
brings
you can't go wrong. My sister just went to treatment yesterday. You know, thank God she finally reached her bottom, and she wanted to come down here to Florida to be near me. And she was like looking through all my books and going, can I have this and can I have that? And we were talking the other night, and I said, you know what? My sponsor told me the big book. All the big books.
beautiful.
It's God so good.
Well, I'm so delighted you were here today, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Me too. Thanks for
Because they're too kind of me and not on God. That's what I'm thinking that is. Yeah, the thing is, girlfriend, like out of a relationship, like on a made first date, and I just started my fourth step, and oh, what? Yeah, you said I didn't meet this guy, like he didn't meet or anything, but he's been nickname. He only has like 3 months. So my sponsor's been giving me like all these. I had to like not tell him I had so I made it up. So I did like what I had, but then like I felt so bad for the manner that I did that, and her cell phone was turned off for like a week. And I ended up calling her, and we hung out, and
Are you asking her a
I told
question?
her this morning.
No, I'm just waiting.
Isn't that a nice thing to say?
Like I'm like really